This is John Ramsey, and this is my big comeback. I've got a very, very interesting guest today, the Honorable Joe Grammer, retired Bay County judge. And I just glad to have you, Joe. Thanks for being on with us today.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
Well, we've known each other a few years through our good friend Apostle Nolan Ball, and we'll talk about him in just a minute. But you're retired now. So how long were you on the bench?
Let's see. I took the bench on January of '09, and I stayed until August 31st of last year. So 15 years and 8 months.
15, longer than I thought. I was thinking about 10 years or so, 15 years. Probably felt like 20 to you.
Just because I look so youthful that you thought I would.
So, and you were on the judge at Bay County 15 years, and you're retired now. So what are you doing retired?
I'm adjusting.
You're adjusting.
Yeah,
it's a big adjustment.
It is a big adjustment. It's not the easiest thing I've ever done. So, but there are a lot of good things about it, like I don't have to wear dress shoes very often. Most of the time I'm wearing shorts. So, but I'm still adjusting to what I'm
Well, tell me about your journey becoming a judge, the whole attorney thing. And, I saw where you studied at Mercer in Georgia. Tell me about the journey a little bit.
Okay. Well, I have to back up. If you really want to know about my journey to be a judge, I have to back up before I ever went to college or law school, because I think that as I went along, I realized that experiences that I had when I was younger and people that I met before I really pointed into that journey were very important to me, and make things happen that I dealt with or that I considered or that I used throughout my career, both as a prosecutor and as a judge. So, for instance, when I was for 3 years, my last year of college and the first 2 summers of law school, I was a waiter at the beach. The last 2 years at the Treasure Ship, if you remember that.
The Treasure Ship, I do.
And dealing with people who you had to serve, that you had to be calm with, regardless of what was going on with them, if they were having a bad night for whatever reason. If they were overserved, which we tried not to do that. I used those kind of experiences to, I think, every day when I was a lawyer and when I was a judge. Also, for a while, I was a newspaper reporter. I worked for the News Herald.
Wow.
And I worked for the Athens Daily News in Athens, Georgia. And I did some spot reporting for other papers, but learning how to express myself in writing in a concise manner was very important throughout that career. So I at one time I wanted to be a dentist, and if I knew I couldn't be an astronaut, so I wanted to. The other thing I was interested in was civil engineering, because I'm still fascinated by bridges and flyovers and how they figure out these traffic patterns. But when I was in 11th grade, I decided I didn't want to do any more math.
I can see that.
Yeah,
I have a child just like that.
Okay,
so she's figured out.
I was pretty good at algebra, still am, geometry. But once you got past that, I said, I don't really like this.
So you're Bay County native?
Well, I mean, we lived in Bay County since 1970 when I was 12. We moved here January 1st of 1970. Wow. And so I went to Jenks and Bay High and went to Gulf Coast for a year. Then I went off to University of Georgia, and I did an inventory of what I thought were my skills and strengths. And I said, okay, I can speak okay. I can write pretty well. I can argue. That sounds like a lawyer.
Sounds like a lawyer to me.
So I had a lot of encouragement to go and stay in journalism. But I was really afraid that because I was a sports writer, being a sports writer for a single guy who likes sports, great job. You're getting paid to go to games.
That's fun.
You're getting paid to write about games. But I was afraid that if I went that way, I would not go on to law school. So I went into political science, which is one of the more useless.
But it's a big precursor for law, like a lot of lawyers.
Yeah, a lot of lawyers do. I always suggest that people that are considering law school just take whatever they're comfortable with, and they can make good grades. Because you can get into law school, if you make a test score and you have good grades, whatever your degree is.
Yeah.
I went to school with nurses.
It's good to know.
Yeah, a couple of aerospace engineers that were a PE coach. these were people that were my classmates in law school who all succeeded and did well. So I probably wouldn't have gone back into political science, but it did make me write and read a lot, which is what you have to do to get through law school. So after I got out, actually the last year, the summer before my last year of law school, I was working on a local guy's Florida legislative campaign. And I met at a rally. They used to have rallies, if you remember that. They'd have fish fries and stuff every weekend. Yeah. And I met at a rally a man that was running for state attorney, Jim Appleman.
Jim Appleman.
And before that, I had never even thought of being a prosecutor. And I met Jim, and I got to know him during that summer going to all these rallies, and I wrote him a note after he got elected, and I said, congratulations. Hey, by the way, I'm graduating this year. And he called me up and said, well, come down here and talk to me, and ended up hiring me. The funny story about that is he called me, I think like in July or August. I was studying for the bar. And he called, or had a secretary call and say, hey, Jim wants you to come down to talk to him to hammer out some things. And I said, well, I haven't shaven and I'm wearing jeans. And she said, he says to come on down. So I walk in the door and he shakes my hand and says, you came down here in jeans without shaving?
He's messing with you, wasn't
yes.
he? Yeah, that's funny.
But
he was here a long time.
He was. I worked with him. I started with him in August of 81, and he had taken office in January. So I stayed with him until my good friend became my boss, Steve Meadows.
Yeah.
For the last 4 years that I was a prosecutor, and it was from there that I ran for judge.
Yeah.
I had been two ways to become a judge in Florida. You either, a state court trial judge, you either get appointed by the governor or you run. And so 4 different times I had applied to be appointed, and a local committee had sent my name to the governor. Going back to Lawton Childs once, Jeb Bush twice.
Lawton Childs. We're going way back
Charlie
now,
Crist. All of those, as I say, I was rejected by three governors 4 different times. And I said, I'm going to run. So the local people like me and think that I should be considered.
Absolutely.
So I ran and I was elected. And that was an interesting summer to have you remember.
I remember. I remember.
That you remember.
It's you really got to put yourself out there to run for office. You open yourself up to a lot of stuff.
You do. Yeah. It was kind of good that I had a name that was fairly well known. In the years that I worked with Steve Meadows, also besides being a prosecutor, I was the public information officer. So I was in the media quite a bit. And then I lucked out in one of my cases that there have been a lot of documentaries about. A new documentary about that came out right during the campaign. So that didn't hurt. People saw me on Court TV or Snap or whatever it was. So, but you put yourself out there, and you, when I ran, my wife took the brunt of it. Not anything ugly. She was on pins and needles the whole time.
You really put yourself out there to run for public office. What's your as a prosecutor before you became a judge? What's your big case that you remember, or the one that really stuck with you?
Well, I would say I would pick different cases than the one that people know about the most. Like I say, this one case I had, this murder case where a mother-in-law or a grandmother hired a hitman to kill her ex-son-in-law.
Yeah.
That one was covered by Court TV, and in fact, there's going to be another Investigation Discoveries working on another documentary, which will be, I think, the 6th one. The murder happened in 1998.
Wow. People like that crime TV.
They do.
It's popular.
People always remember the defendant's name, so I'm going to say the victim's name, Ron Stovall. He was,
Ron Stovall.
Ron Stovall, murdered in his home. And so that's probably my biggest case, just because it's the one that has the most.
Got the most attention anyway.
It makes me think of once I was trying a case back when there was a newspaper that was able to cover local stuff. I was trying a murder case, and the reporter didn't come down till about the 4th day. And after that day, she asked if she could speak to me, and she said, "This is really low profile." And I said, "Not to me. I'm trying it just as hard as if y'all were down here with, if Court TV was here, or if you were here every day." But I said, "You guys decide whether it's low profile or not." So to me, every case that I handled was important because of the people involved, even the defendants' families. you know, the impact on them.
Oh, yeah.
It's important.
It's devastating on both sides. I mean, there's victims on both sides. I mean, there's certainly a victim of the crime, but all the families are hurt. Just a bunch of hurt in one room. It's a devastating thing. You know, I've got a daughter that's an attorney, and she's kind of walking through that minefield of finding what she can do. She can do it all. Does she want to do it all? And right now she's trying some different parts of it. And she's with a big firm, so thankfully they actually make them try different areas to see where they're going to flourish, which I think is good. And there's some painful parts of it, but I said, this is how you find out. You know, do you want to do that every day? Because I'm sure as a prosecutor, that's a heavy thing to carry home every day. Yeah.
Well, you try not to take it home. I think that when my children were growing up, when they were young, unless they saw some TV coverage, which we didn't watch the news in our house while they were awake, they really didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
Now, my wife, my first degree murder case that I handled, I tried in December of the year I got married in August. And my wife said, "Can you bring home the crime scene photos?" And I said, "You don't need to see them." And she said, "Yes, I do. It won't be." And so I brought her 3 notebooks full, and she said, "Okay, I never want to see those again."
Never want to see it
so
again.
that was, she learned that I didn't really need to bring it home. I would bring home, if there was some problem, or I'd have to bring home and say, like that same murder case, the jury went out at 5:30 p.m., didn't come back till 3:30 a.m. I had to let her know then, hey, I'm not coming home, but it's not because I'm out on the town. I'm down here waiting on this jury. So,
deliberating that long.
Yeah, but we didn't. I try not to take it home with me, and I try to, you know, you have to think about it. And there's a lot of time where you have to work on it. I try not to work on it at home because I want to keep that separate from the office, which that made my wife nervous too, because she'd say, "You're down there at night. Nobody's down there." So, well, I'll call you before I leave, and you know, whatever.
So Mercer University, big school, small
school.
I don't know
private
much.
School.
You know, my daughter went to Sanford. About the same size.
About the same
like
size.
Yeah.
I went to University of Georgia for my undergrad, which is a bigger school.
Big school.
And Mercer is still a fairly small school, although a little bit larger. It was founded as a Baptist school. And the law school on a separate campus from the main campus.
But still in Macon.
Still in Macon. I go there now sometimes because a young lady that I know is playing soccer there.
Yeah.
And so when I'm driving back and forth from Athens, Georgia, if they're playing soccer, I try to stop by there and see. So I see the campus and see how it's grown. It's still a smaller school. It's a private school. It's one that I probably couldn't have afforded to go to now.
Yeah.
So
let's take a step now. So those are your years as a prosecutor. You become a judge. How's it look from the other side of the bench? I mean,
well, it really was not that difficult to transition.
Yeah.
When I first got on the bench, I was doing all criminal.
Yeah.
There came a time where I was doing civil cases too, a lot of landlord-tenant, small claims, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I always thought as a prosecutor, you know, you had to wear the white hat. You had to always strive to do the right thing. And so the judge, all you had to do, the only thing that was difficult was you just had to look at it and say, they messed up. You can't help them out. You can't do anything for them. And I had the real pleasure of the whole time I was on working with new and young lawyers.
Yeah.
And when they would do trial work, then we would debrief after trials. I always offered that, hey, come to my office.
Kind of like let's talk about what went right and what went wrong.
What you could have done. And I always said that each side could learn from what the other person did. You know, that's and so I thoroughly enjoyed that, dealing with the younger lawyers, and most of them were sincere on both sides, public defenders. Some of those public defenders and prosecutors are still my friends today. Some of them never forgave me for ruling against them, but
that's right.
But it was not that difficult to transition.
Yeah. So, like, you know, when I think of a judge, of course, nonpartisan, you know, it's good to, you know, I see politics edge into everything, even though we don't want it to. You know, we don't want it to. How hard is that to stay?
Judicial activism is not right.
It's not right.
That's my opinion.
Tell me about it.
It's not, I don't speak for anybody but myself.
Yeah.
One of the things you have to do when you become a judge is you have to say, no matter what my opinion is, I'm going to apply the law and apply it fairly. And I just see too much going on, I think, with judges making rulings that are 100% politically motivated.
That's sad.
It is
and,
sad.
and we see it a lot, I
Sad.
believe.
I have a friend that a few years ago, I was riding my bike by his house, and he said, hey, are you and some of the other judges going to save our post office? And at first I didn't know what he was talking about, but I said, that's not the judge's That's not the judge's
You're not a legislator.
Role. No. And if there's a case in front of him or her, then he or she needs to decide. But and you shouldn't be able to just go out and forum shop and pick the one that you think is going to rule in your favor.
Exactly.
So I said, no, I hope the judges don't do anything to save the post office. If a judge stands up and said, I'm going to do something to save the post office, we've got a problem.
Yeah.
So that's just an example.
I get it. And to me, that's one of the scariest things is seeing the quagmire we're in nationally, and is I believe a lot of judges inserting themselves into a place where they're not a legislator. They don't make the law. They interpret the law is what I understand of it.
What you're supposed to do.
And I think that's the right thing. I'm going to take a break because I've got some good questions to ask you about this very subject. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Heroes Child is a nonprofit organization that is on a mission to help community heroes with the everyday cost of childcare. We know that heroes like our military personnel, first responders, and foster families need care for their children. Heroes Child awards these families scholarships that go to help pay their childcare tuition. Use the QR code on the screen to donate now or visit heroeschild.org today.
Hey, I'm back here. This is John Ramsey with My Big Comeback. I've got Joe Grammer, retired Bay County judge, and we're talking about being a judge and what that entails. And, we were talking about nonpartisan. And, I try to say nonpartisan. That doesn't mean apolitical. Doesn't mean I don't care. It means I try not to take a side. I know in the last couple of elections, I had people in the church that wanted me to speak for both sides. And I said, I'm going to speak for neither because I really believe that the person that makes the most difference in our lives is the man in the mirror, what you do for your family. Certainly elections have consequences and there's an effect on all of us. And I look at some of the things we're going through nationally, influences, decisions coming to the Supreme Court. And what I looked at both sides of this thing where just for example, one of the judge who's currently a sitting judge, so I'm not going to say his name, but I asked him one time, I said, what's the worst thing about being a judge? He says, mandatory sentences. He says, John, if you think about it, he says, a judge, you've hired him, elected him, chosen him to make judgments on things. So when you hand him a mandatory sentence, you've taken away his ability. He said, there's things where I've had to sentence people to things that after understanding the whole case, I wouldn't have sentenced them to. And there's because understanding the case is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to understand it and pass judgment on that. And he said, when you hand a judge a mandatory sentence, you've taken that option away from him. I mean, what do you feel about that?
Well, I have a contrary opinion.
Tell me. I'd like to hear it.
So we just talked about the legislature and the judges being separate, right?
Yeah.
And let me put in a plug for our founding fathers. Those were some pretty smart people back then.
Very smart.
And though all of them were men that we would call the founding fathers, obviously, many of them were highly influenced by their wives, or maybe even their mothers. So the men and women that were the founding fathers were pretty smart, and they set it up to make the each branch to be a check on the other branch, right? Yeah. And so no one branch of the government should be above the others. Well, so with the legislature, which makes the law, says this ought to be treated with a mandatory sentence, the judge should impose it. If he doesn't like it, that's okay. You're allowed to have your opinion, but he should impose it. And I'll tell you, just kind of you're talking about national, but kind of on a local basis, just kind of a funny thing about that. One of our local judges who's passed on now, who was a great guy, had a case with him one time, and he was making a ruling in a criminal case that was contrary to what the law was. I said, well, Judge, the DCA says such and such and such and such. And he said, sometimes they reverse me, sometimes I reverse them.
That's good. That's good.
And I think that that's on a very small level. He was talking about not something that was going to he wasn't going to try to affect something that happened in Washington State or Oregon or whatever, because that's not his jurisdiction. But it's kind of that attitude on a national basis. Some people some judges that decide there should be political. And they say, hey, I've got power to make a decision in the Southern District of Florida that will apply in Nevada. I just think that's a problem.
Well, it is a problem, and that's what we're coming to. I mean, at some point, it's going to come to a head of what, there's no other word for it except constitutional crisis. Who makes that decision? I look at the pandemic decision, where someone declares a national health threat or a national health crisis, and it's almost like declaring that suspends all the laws, which didn't seem right. The other side's got the football now, and it's national security risk, so that suspends all the laws. At some point, somebody, and I assume it's the Supreme Court, is going to have to come down with a ruling that says, there's got to be a definition of what this entails when you call a national health crisis or a national security threat. And I'm not talking about either side, whether you're Republican or Democrat. It's going to come down to how do we interpret the Constitution?
Well, I could talk all day about some of the things that happened in the pandemic because the CDC, which I have a lot of respect for what they're called to do, they did things they were not called to do.
They're not lawmakers.
They sent out mandates about landlord-tenant.
Yeah.
And they said, you can't kick this guy out. So we had people just in Bay County that were staying in places and just decided they wouldn't pay rent. They were coming up $16,000, $17,000, $18,000 of rent. And that's an extreme case. Can't get them out.
Yeah.
Some court I think in Memphis, somebody brought that in and said, hey, CDC doesn't have rulemaking authority to tell people that you have to suspend the law on landlord-tenant, which sounds like a small thing unless you're a landlord.
It's a big thing.
Right. You're a landlord and that's how you make your living. So you got 5 apartments, you got to get rent. These people don't have to pay.
Yeah.
And that was a real problem. That was a real problem for us. And we had to, for a while, we were hamstrung by that. And
how did it resolve?
Well, it resolved because when one federal court, I think in Memphis, said, no, they don't have the authority to do this.
Yeah.
We were able to say, all right, we're applying that law in Bay County. And at the time, there were 3 of us county judges that were doing landlord-tenant.
Yeah.
And we got together and said, what do you think? I said, this is pretty well reasoned right here. And there were requirements that the person who was applying to not be evicted would have to say they were affected in some way by COVID. And it was really not that hard. But a lot of times those people wouldn't even fill out the form they were supposed. So they were easy to say, no, you can't. Yeah. You decide you pay the rent or you leave. It's not. And so that's the biggest thing I think that during the pandemic that affected us locally, and maybe people didn't realize that all over the country. Yeah. Landlords found out about it. Landlords understood that, it's different. If somebody has a garage apartment, he still ought to be able to get his or her rent.
Yeah.
But somebody you got retired couples that have 4 or 5 townhouses, whatever, and they're counting on that to live on.
Yeah.
The CDC wasn't giving them any way to apply for relief.
That's really what it comes down to. It is who has the authority to make the law, because the judges are the interpreters of the law. The legislatures are the creators of the law or make the law. Where does the president fall in that checks and balances?
Well, the president has very specific authority as laid out by the Constitution. Going back to when President Nixon was in office, this is going back to my political science days, there was a suggestion that Nixon was trying to put into effect what they called the imperial presidency. Where he would rule it like an emperor. And fortunately, people stood up and said, no, you're the president. You're not the emperor. You're not El Duce. You're not.
Constitution still matters.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not the czar. So it's not. This is not the first time we've had to deal with this, and we've had. I think in the last several years, we've had both sides trying to say, "Hey, I get to decide what's going on."
And it is both sides. Yeah, they all have that. Where they, I guess, call it overreach. And by declaring a crisis, and there are, I'm all for. Being healthy. I'm all for securing the border. I'm not against any of those things, but there's got to be a perimeter. There's got to be a guideline, a guardrail for us going to the extreme and just saying, I said this, so this means I can do anything I want. And habeas corpus, due process, those things still matter, and they've got to, or we fall apart.
Yeah, due process is probably the linchpin of the whole judicial system.
Yeah.
That everyone who comes before the court is entitled to due process.
Yeah.
And now what due process is another story. And so some people would argue that due process is a lot more than what the law says that it is. But it's still, everybody that comes in front of any court in the United States is entitled to due process. Again, what that is not the same in every case. It's not the same in every court. Just because it's based on the facts that are there. This person, everybody that's charged with a crime in the state of Florida is entitled to see a judge within 24 hours if they're in custody. Okay, that's part of due process. Due process says you're entitled to a fast and speedy trial.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Does that mean it's going to be in 3 months or 6 months? If it may be a case that it can't get to trial in 6 months. Person still may have due process.
And here's the loophole that's being played with is that for a citizen, or do you have to be a United States citizen
Depends
for
on
that
what
to
you're
apply?
talking about. No, due process. If you're charged with an offense, you're entitled to due process.
Yes.
You're entitled. You don't have to be a citizen.
Yeah.
But due process for someone who's here illegally is different than it is for somebody because they don't have all the rights that a citizen has, but they do have a right to due process. So you're charged with a crime and you're from wherever, Venezuela.
Yeah.
You do have the right to a jury trial. You have the right to confront your accusers. You have the right to have an attorney appointed for you if you cannot afford one. All of those basic rights, but you don't have the right to have something more than what the local person has.
Exactly.
And that's where I think we've got some issues.
So
that's way beyond my pay grade.
But do you feel like that structure's already in place? It's just a matter of interpreting, or do you think something has to be cleaned up? Or are those lines blurry?
I don't think the lines are so blurry. I mean, we in the time that I was a judge, let's just talk about immigration a little bit. When I first started, we had Spanish interpreters that were there for every misdemeanor arraignment, which was 3 days a week, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, regardless, unless it was a holiday. We might have one person that was a Spanish speaker. They might come in the morning and we might say we have none. Mm-hmm. Before I left, we were having days where we'd have 35 or 40 Spanish speakers.
Wow.
So what's due process for them? Well, one of the things that I did, and it was just a personal thing, was I said, what if an English speaker is in a foreign country, gets charged with a crime, and goes into court, and there's nobody there that can speak his language.
Yeah.
And the judge and everybody else is speaking some other language that you don't have any idea. So we had interpreters set to come in. That's good. But I decided that I wanted to tell the Spanish speakers at the beginning of court that we would have an interpreter for them. So I asked one of our interpreters to write me up a little script, and it was just very short. And I would say, good morning, good afternoon. I tell the crowd, because I also don't think we ought to spend 10 minutes talking to them in Spanish while we've got 15 of them and 100 people over here.
But you gave that announcement in Spanish?
I gave that, yes, my poor Spanish.
Good for you.
My 3/4 of University of Georgia Spanish. No, I would say that...
To me, though, that's a judge trying to be as fair as he can be.
And here's I thought these people are here, and most of them spoke. Most of the people that were charged, and by the way, most of the Spanish speakers that we saw were charged with driving offenses. We did have some violent things, but not as many. But what I wanted to do was say, here's what I'd say. Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to County Court Arraignments. I'm going to attempt to tell our Spanish speakers that we have an interpreter, and then I'll give you your instructions. So that way the English speakers knew why I was saying something in Spanish. And then it was 2 or 3 lines.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it on the air.
Yeah.
But that told them that we'd have an interpreter. Now, the funny story about that was the very first time I had it, one of the things I was saying was minutos, which is minutes. I was telling them we'd have an interpreter in dos minutos. But I messed up and I said dos monitos. And so our Spanish speaker and interpreter came and said, you just told them you'd have one and a few monkeys.
Oh,
you'd have an interpreter and a few monkeys. And I said, okay,
That's
not
funny.
bonito. So I only made that mistake once. But it was important to me to tell those folks, men
to
and
let
women,
them know what's going on
that,
in case they don't understand.
Don't burn your brain up trying to figure out what I'm saying when I give the long speech about 3-4 minutes about what your rights are. Here's what's going to happen today. Here's the process. Here's what your rights are. Here's how you do this. Don't try to burn yourself out thinking about that. Just relax because we're going to have an interpreter for it.
That's good.
And I just thought that was, I don't know, it was important to me to do that.
Does every courtroom, every judge do that in Bay County?
No. And the court administration often offered to give us a video. Let us come up with a video and play that. And I said, the problem with that is, again, then you're taking those 12, 15, whatever, 20 Spanish speakers, and you're elevating them again above all the 100 and something
You want to
English
keep it the
speakers.
same as much as possible.
So you just tell them, hey, just hold your horses. We got somebody coming. Because before we started doing that, we'd get in there and make a speech and say, here's what all your rights are. And they're over there going, I don't have any idea what he's saying.
Yeah. Good for you being fair, and I think that's the right thing. You know, there's
I just
so
thought
many.
Of what if I was in that?
Yeah.
What if I was?
What if you were in another country?
What if I was in Mexico and you know, the time that I was in Mexico when the policeman tried to.
I
get
think
a bribe,
my first trip to
done?
Mexico, I was 40 years old, and I look Hispanic, and my mother's Mexican, and people were walking up to me asking directions, which I don't speak Spanish at all, so I was not able to help them. But you know, I could imagine if I was just dropped over there and needed to go into a courtroom, I'd be lost.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd be lost.
Absolutely. And so I thought I don't know, it just seemed to make it work better too, because by the time then I got the Spanish speakers, and if it was delayed, like if our interpreter was going to be late, then I'd say, just a few more minutes. Just so they wouldn't think.
Just a few more monkeys. And you'll be there.
A few more monkeys.
Yeah, that's all right. I like talking to you. Listen, we're going to take just a break. We'll be back in just a minute.
Are you ready to connect your organization with an audience that is eager for inspiration? My Big Comeback, hosted by John Ramsey, shares powerful stories of resilience and redemption, featuring guests who have turned life setbacks into major comebacks. New episodes drop the 1st and 15th of every month. For those interested in being a part of this community, sponsorship opportunities are now available. To learn more, contact Sophia Tim at sophiatimhwc@gmail.com. Let's make a comeback together.
Good to have you back. This is John Ramsey with My Big Comeback. I'm with Joe Grammer, retired Bay County judge, and we're just talking about the law and some of the accommodations and things that he's made in his courtroom, and some of the interesting cases that he's tried and done as a prosecutor and a judge. And Joe, I want to talk to you a little bit about your person now. You've retired. What are you doing now that you're retired?
I'm adjusting.
You're adjusting, huh?
That's it. I'm adjusting.
Got any hobbies or
I
things
have lots
that
of
you're?
hobbies. I run.
I know you're a runner.
I ride my bike.
Yeah.
In fact, I've got coming up a 7-day bike ride
Ooh.
across Georgia, and so I'm training for that. I read or I consume books.
What do you read these days?
Well, I consume books by audio, Kindle, and
I'm a big Audible
physical
person. Yeah.
So I always have at least 3, most of the time 4 things going.
Yeah. What's your genre? What's
anything? Almost anything.
Almost anything.
I certain things I don't like. I mean, I like good writing. I really, for an Audible book, I really don't like a lot of bad language.
Yeah.
People always say that's when I'm reading it, I don't hear it in my mind,
Yeah.
so it's not so.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I've turned off some Audible books that I got just because I said, really, you're showing your limited vocabulary when you use the same word over and over and over again. So not to be a prude, because like I said, I can read that, but I don't want to be assaulted with it. So other than that, though, this year I've read a lot of fiction, a lot of nonfiction. I've read some science fiction. I read some books about running or riding bikes.
I'm not that into science fiction, and
either, but
I don't
read
really
one
like. I don't like fantasy. I like historical fiction. I like a lot of World War II stuff. Like All the Light You Cannot See is one of my favorite books. Have you read Killers of the Flower Moon?
I have read Killers of the Flower Moon.
Now
Excellent book.
let me ask you this about this book, because when I read the book, I listened to it on Audible, there was a big part of it talking about the creation of the FBI. Mm-hmm. But if you saw the movie, The Killers of the Flower Moon, none of that is in there.
Well, they can't fit in everything.
But to me, that was a super important part of the
it's,
story.
It's in the title.
Yeah.
The title is The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI.
Yeah,
So,
it literally started the FBI from this murder case.
But the movie was still good.
Yeah, it was
good. If you didn't read the book first?
Yeah, I'd still think it was a good movie. It's a long movie, though. Yeah. It's a long movie. But I thought the FBI thing was so interesting. And again, goes back to judges and laws and all, because the sheriff was involved in defrauding these people, they couldn't call the sheriff and say, hey, they're defrauding these people. So they had to bring someone from the outside, and Washington had to get involved with a federal law enforcement, which is sometimes necessary for what's going on.
Did not look like, the real guy didn't look like Leonardo DiCaprio.
No, not at all.
No, I think that, what fascinated me about this more than the FBI was the fact that these Native Americans they would be the richest among the richest of the rich today.
Yeah.
If they had, these cars there, they're all driving big Cadillacs, and then that somebody came in and took their money from them.
To me, the whole, and I have a lot of relatives that are Native American, and my mom is from Gallup, New Mexico, which is the Native American capital of the world. More indigenous people in that area, and it's because of all the reservations. Big Hopi, Navajo, Zuni, all those big reservations are out there in that Four Corners area of New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona. And but really, when you go out there, it's just stark desert. Nothing out there. And that's what we gave them for taking. When the settlements begin to push further east. Or further west, they begin to take these people's land, and they loaded them all up and took them out there and dropped them in the middle of the desert. Of course, the how they've gotten back is the casinos have become big business because it's a sovereign nation. The Navajo Indian Reservation is a sovereign nation in the middle of our nation, and a lot of people don't know that. That they've got their own jurisdiction in their reservation. But when you see a movie like this, how if they got anything, someone was there to take it. Someone was there to take it from them. And it's a sad thing. It really is.
Most of this, though, I think was, at least the way that I interpreted it, was not the government coming in and taking it. It was greedy people.
Local greedy people. Yeah.
And so, what can we do about that? That's those people have been with us since the dawn of time, right?
Yeah.
That will take advantage of the weaker people. Or the less sophisticated, really, is what we're talking about here. So it's a shame, obviously.
Yeah.
It's at least you said they loaded them up on trucks instead of the ones that were in Georgia and North Carolina.
Trail of Tears.
They just made them walk out there.
Terrible. I forget what book I read it in that said, the way all land was settled was first the pioneers, then the settlers, than the attorneys. That's like someone conquered the land, someone settled the land, then someone come in with a piece of paper and said, I own the land. No, just messing with you.
If you want to read another good book about Indians or Native Americans, though, now I can't think of the name of it, but it's about Quanah Parker. Have you read that
I've
book?
read that.
I can't think of the name.
Under the it's not moon. It's
I think it does have.
It does have moon in it. I forget it. I've read it. Yeah.
Okay.
Quanah Parker.
That is.
I like the native studies. I like all that.
That gives you a different
Yeah.
You know, he's
Yeah.
somebody that was bloodthirsty, murdered people, and all
Yeah.
that. Next thing you know, they put a suit on him, and he's
Yeah.
living in a house,
Yeah.
and people are
Yeah.
coming by to meet him and shake his
Yeah,
hand.
he's like
I
becomes
don't know. There's
becomes
just-
famous.
People
Yeah.
are people.
Yeah, have you read All the Light We Cannot See?
I have not.
World War II, really
I'm
good.
familiar with that one.
Of course, one of my favorite authors, John Steinbeck. I just like his
I read
language. The
Grapes
whole
of
Grapes
Wrath just a
Yeah.
couple of years ago. For
I love the
first time.
language of it. Yeah,
I thought it was really. What is the girl's name in there? That's something Rose. You know, instead of just calling her Rose, they call it Rose of Sharon.
yeah, Rose of Sharon. Yeah,
So, if you like that, have you read Four Winds by Kristen Hanna?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great.
Kristen Hanna is one of my favorites. So
Yeah.
I keep getting this. I'll get a recommendation, an email, and
Have you read The Women?
I've read. I think everything she's written.
You know, I'm a great writer.
Yeah.
Great writer, and the Women book. I'm sure it'll be made in a movie before it's over with
I
because
think it's already said.
it's a really popular book, but it's just a captivating story.
She writes. I always say she writes pain better than anybody I
Yeah,
know. The first one I read by her was
Nightingale.
No, I read The Great Alone before that.
Oh, I haven't
The
read
Great
that
Al-
one.
The Great Alone is
It
about,
Alaska? Set in
It is
Alaska?
Alaska.
Yes, I did read it.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And so then the next one I read was called Homefront, which was kind of a twist because the woman was a helicopter pilot in the reserves, and so the guy was at the home front, and so a lot of pain. And then I've read The Nightingale, and some of her books are more romantic type, but she's solid. My sister
great
and
writer. Great
my
writer.
youngest sister and I always swap those around and say,
Yeah,
have
that's
you
great.
read anything by Kristen Hanna lately? And you know, when's her next one coming out? So yeah,
That is
she's
great.
amazing.
What would you tell a young person that wants to become a lawyer? What would you tell them? What do they need to do to really prepare themselves for that?
Well, they need to stay out of trouble.
Yeah, that's right.
They need to be able to go on a course of study that they can make good grades in.
Yeah,
As they get closer to maybe in college, take a lot of classes that require you to read and write all the time, because if you try that out and you don't like it, you don't need to go to law school.
you're going to be doing it all the time.
Because you need to, you know, all you have to do is get out of law school and pass the bar to be a
Yeah.
lawyer, right? So if you could have a C average right out of 70, get past the bar, you're a lawyer, the same as the top of the class at Harvard.
Yeah,
But you have to get through that first. And
Yeah.
so I always say, just do something that you like enough to stick with it, course of study, and that you read and write a lot. Because you're going to, when you go to law school, you're going to read so much stuff that swims around in your head, and you have to write. Even if you're just writing it for yourself, you have to do it all the time. And most, I don't know, things have changed since I got out. Maybe they have all multiple choice, but I don't think so. All the testing was, got a book. and
reading
you just started
comprehension is
doing it.
still a big part of it. Yeah. Who was the inspiration in your life? Who, when you think of someone that really inspired you about life in general, who was it?
I get inspired every day by somebody. I get inspired by my grandson. I get inspired by my wife, Jenny. I get inspired by people that I meet.
Yeah.
And I look for it. I look for something inspiring. And, you know, the first inspiration for most people is one of your parents, and my father. He inspired me to work really hard.
Yeah.
He also inspired me not to change jobs like he did.
Yeah.
I mean, he changed jobs a lot as I was growing up because he never felt fulfilled or satisfied. So he's always seemed to be moving on. I appreciated the fact that he busted his rear end to support us. But I decided when I started my adult career, you know, when I finished law school, I'm going to find something and stick with it. So I had 2 jobs in 43 years and a few months, or 43 years and 2 weeks, what it really was. And then of course, you know, you mentioned Apostle Ball earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about him was, if ever he said something and then I said the same thing later at my house, my wife said, "You said the same thing Apostle Paul did." I was golden.
Oh yeah.
Because she said if I said something that he said.
Such an inspiring person.
Yes, and a caring person.
Caring.
You know, he was. A lot of people were a little bit intimidated by him.
Yeah.
White hair, deep voice. You know. He could be intimidating, but what a loving person.
What a loving person. I remember I was walking out of what we used to call the Blue Top Waffle Shop, on 23rd Street.
Yeah.
It's now in the Cove. But I was walking out, and he reached out and grabbed my arm, and we introduced each other, and he said, well, I know who you are, and I know who he was, of course. And he said, well, we know who each other are now. Let's have breakfast. Let's have lunch. And that started 14 years of me meeting with Apostle Ball and either having lunch or breakfast, and you know how those were 2 or 3 hours. That was not a 30-minute lunch. No. I would tell my staff, don't know when I'll be back,
but he was always paying for it.
But just always just pour into your life, and he was my person that helped take the scales off my eyes and help me see. And at a time in my life when I really felt I was done, I had messed up too bad and too many mistakes, and he really inspired me. No, God's never done with you, and you just gotta get your mind straight and get going. Get going.
When I was pretty much decided I wanted to run for judge, I said I'm going to talk to him. I told my wife. She said, you need to do it. And I said, I'm going to talk to him. And if he says no, I'm not going to do it. I mean, I respected him that much. And of course, not only did he say yes, but he wrote me a check right away. He was the first person to contribute to my campaign.
It was a blessing.
What a great man.
We have had lots of great people in our community. And it sounds like you've had lots of great people in your life. And I appreciate you talking to me today. I've toyed with the idea. I don't know if I could pull it off or not, but I know a lot of judges and several of them, and I feel like they're freer when they're retired to talk a little more openly.
Sure.
And I'd like to talk about some of these bigger issues. I may put me a panel together and just throw some hardball questions at you that you could do, because I love your knowledge. I love the time you spent. People don't understand that judges make an investment in their community. It's a hard task, and you really do put you and your family out there by taking that place on the bench, and we appreciate it. I appreciate you talking to us today.
Anytime.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you.